I told my wife I had this experience on Sunday. We visited Trinity CME Church, and the pastor there, Pastor Tommy Benjamin, preached such a prophetic word. I was overcome. In fact, I saw in him, Dr. Moss, he looked just like John Lewis as he was standing there and gave such a prophetic message. And I said to him, don't ever stop preaching like that. We need it. And that is the same admonition I give to Otis Moss. Unfortunately, we don't have enough strong, talented, gifted, unapologetic, and unashamed preachers of the true gospel like we have in this preacher. When you talk about the Renaissance, whenever we refer to a Renaissance man, we're talking about someone who possesses several skills and abilities across genres. And this brother is a Renaissance man, a producer, a director, a rapper, a preacher, a professor, a leader. I'm just so proud of him and glad that the committee saw fit to invite an embodiment of what the Renaissance represents to us. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to present the husband of Monica and the daddy of Elijah and Michaela, the Reverend Dr. Otis B. Moss III. Welcome, Dr. Moss.
First, I want to say thank you to my brother and to my friend, to President McCorn, who he mentioned that we have known each other for quite some time. He was so kind to me when I entered Morehouse College, put his arm around me, told me what was left and right and this, that, and the other as a chapel assistant. When I was at seminary, divinity school at Yale, he was so kind to allow me to give a sermon there that I had put together in class, and it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible, but he was so very kind throughout the years. I have deep love and respect for the McCorn family, and to witness your growth and expansion as you are just elevating so many minds. It has been an absolute joy to see the two of you partner together in work and ministry, and you are at an amazing institution, that being Paine College, and we are delighted that you all are here. Now, I want to give a shout out to our wonderful poet who did such a beautiful job today with his gifts and creativity. We thank God for him. And I want to just make mention of our professor over here. He's taking pictures now. Professor Jones over here taking pictures. See, I remember when he was coming through Tabernacle, hanging out, and we had a conversation about miseducation of the Negro and Harold Cruz's The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And now you were raising the questions then as a student, and now you are teaching the students. And it's just a delight just to see how God has moved in such a wonderful way. Now, President McCorn already mentioned that I have family here. They are from Tabernacle Baptist Church. They are definitely family. I have to give a shout out to my family. If you all would just stand for a moment. Monica want me to tell everybody hello, so it's a general hello to everybody. But we just appreciate you all so very much. We were too young to pastor. They were so very kind to us when we arrived here in Augusta. And Augusta has always been home, that our children were birthed here in this space, and people just wrapped their arms around Elijah and Michaela. Both of them are doing quite well and have fond memories to this day of Augusta, and still want to know immediately following worship service whose house they are going to eat, and none of the food is as good as they had in Augusta. So we are just very grateful for the love and for you wrapping your arms around us. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful to talk about the Harlem Renaissance, and I want to name this lecture. Named after a wonderful book, if you have the opportunity, Professor Jones, to pick it up. It was just re-released a little while ago, called Dark Water. It is a book that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote and had several essays that influenced many of those in the Harlem Renaissance. Dark Water, the art and resistance and genius of resilience. That's what I want to talk about today as we talk about the Harlem Renaissance. And I begin this way. There is something about you, Black people. There was something about you. Your very existence is an act of resistance. There was something about you. An entire system was built to make you believe that you do not have power. Riddle me this. Why would America create laws stating you cannot read or write, but simultaneously put out propaganda that you don't have the intellectual capacity to read and write? That if in fact that you don't have the intellectual capacity to read and write, there's no need to put laws in place so that you can't read or write. There's something about you. I would suggest to you today, Paine College, the Harlem Renaissance was a space that undermined supremacist notions of Black inferiority. The Harlem Renaissance was a space where Black artists made the conscious decision to look at the world through the lens of Black creativity, the lens of Black ingenuity and Black future possibility and Black spirituality. Do not get it twisted. The Harlem Renaissance, a period roughly between the 1920s and the 30s, people of African descent chose to defy the widespread propaganda of Black inferiority. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite poets, a woman who I recently discovered by the name of Anita Scott Coleman. Anita Scott Coleman, who was born in Guaymas, Mexico. She was an Afro-Mexican. Hear this, she's an Afro-Mexican who born in 1890 and moved to New Mexico around her childhood. And when she moved to New Mexico, please understand, she moved from Mexico to New Mexico because New Mexico was part of Mexico, just so you know. So this Afro-Mexican woman, and she begins to write. She is inspired by the likes of Langston Hughes and others. She writes this poem entitled Portraiture to give a framing of what she sees as the resilience and the power of Black people. Now change it for just a modern audience in reference to how she wrote, but it goes this way. Black people are the tall trees that remain standing in a forest after a fire. Flame strips their branches, flame sears their limbs, flame scorches their trunks, yet stand these trees, for their roots are thrust deep in the heart of the earth. Black people are the tall trees that remain standing in a forest after a fire. Written in 1934, this, we must understand, this Harlem Renaissance is influenced by the post-Civil War Reconstruction and the post-Reconstruction response to a movement during that time period that many people do not know about, to a populist movement that happened in America that was called Make America Great Again. I'm not making this up. I want you to understand this. Because the response to Reconstruction was that Southern Confederates specifically wanted to take their country back. And so they created something known as Black codes. These are different from the slave codes. The slave codes were specifically for those who were enslaved in terms of what slaves could and could not do. But then during this period, after the enslavement period, the creation of what were called Black codes. Let me tell you what some of the Black codes were. The Black codes were that there were certain type of speech that Black people could say and could not say. There were certain type of gestures. You better not point at certain people, or you could be arrested for your pointing. There was something known as vagrancy laws
that if 2 or 3 people of African descent were walking down the street, you could be arrested. If you did not have your papers, you would then be arrested, taken before a judge, and they would tell you, said, well, you were walking around vagrant late at night in Georgia. You need to pay off your debt. And in order to pay off your debt, the judge would then say, for the next 9 years, you're going to work for maybe U.S. Steel. But you were never paid. You just had to work. 500,000 black people after the enslavement period were re-enslaved in America up until 1971. We know this system as peonage or sharecropping. Because every year that when you thought you paid off your debt because you weren't the accountant, you would go to that person and say, I paid off my debt. And said, no, sir, you got to work one more year. The South was rebuilt literally by the 500,000 people who were re-enslaved in America. And so you had artists that were raising the question, what does it really mean to be free? If I have a piece of paper that says I'm free, but I'm unable to go to school. I'm unable to purchase land. What does freedom actually mean? So all across the South, after the enslavement period, after the Civil War, there was a fight of who would be in control. So the federal government then set up what was known as the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau, as a matter of fact, in Georgia, down in Savannah, there was a pastor at First African Baptist Church that was actually making the argument that we need 40 acres and a mule. And that was rescinded. But the Freedmen's Bureau had then been set up all throughout the South, completely changed. 4 million people of African descent were suddenly free. And then there was an influx of all of these people from Europe who were also migrants. And here was the challenge. They said that all of a sudden that these people who are not real Americans are showing up to the United States. They don't speak English like we do. So they were complaining about the Irish. They were complaining about people that they called gypsies, who were not considered to be European during that time period. And so the Freedmen's Bureau was attempting to segment all of these challenges that were happening in the South. And during this period, at the same time of the Freedmen's Bureau, you then have the expansion of denominations, Paine College being one. All of these denominations that then set up schools. Some 4,000 from elementary to college schools that are set up. Changes the trajectory of black life as a result. And it seemed as if America was on a different path. America was going into a direction where we would forget about the conflict and we would build an America that everybody was included. They had to make some amendments to the Constitution, the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment for inclusion, but something happened. There were landowners throughout the South that said, I want my country back. And so in 1871, what was known as the Ironclad Oath, it was rescinded. The Ironclad Oath was simply this. If you were an ex-Confederate meaning someone who was a leader of the Confederate movement, which was an insurrectionist movement to take over the government, the Ironclad Oath said that you could not hold office. But guess what? A president pardoned all of them. You'll get it when you go home. And as a result, they ended up taking positions in Southern governments. And when they took these positions, they did not want people of African descent to have positions of power. They did not want Irish people to have positions of power. They did not want women to have positions of power. You can go down the list. They always had a list of people they didn't like, that didn't look like them. It was really interesting. And so the Confederates were pardoned, and they took control of the government. And that literally changed the trajectory of hope into a trajectory of hurt and pain. And so from that moment, we saw the rise of something that changed America forever. These small terrorist groups began to develop throughout the South. The most famous being the KKK. But prior to that, they were fighting against the idea of someone being sheriff that didn't look like them. They were fighting against the idea of, let me back up this way. When black people were released, when we were emancipated, there were certain skills that we had. And those skills in reference to agriculture, they were looking in many ways to build and create the kind of business and life that would change the lives of their families. If you wanted to find somebody who could really not just pick cotton, but someone who understood the skill and the science behind agriculture, you found somebody black. And they began to compete with these new immigrants who were now coming into the United States. One group knew the agriculture, another group did not. And so when this ironclad oath was shifted, it gave preference to one group over another. But that wasn't the thing that really touched and set off what would end up becoming the Harlem Renaissance. It was in 1915. Probably the greatest American propaganda film that caused the greatest harm in American history was produced and was screened at the White House. It was called Birth of a Nation. The Birth of a Nation rewrote history in America. All of a sudden, you have D.W. Griffith, who had issues. It was from a book called The Klansman. That's a whole other thing that you wanted to adapt a book called The Klansman. But all of a sudden, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, became the heroes in the story. They were saving the South from these terrible black people. And this is on film. There was not a single black person in the film. They had something called blackface. And every black person in the film was problematic. And the images of the birth of a nation became the standard images for Hollywood for the next almost 100 years. Let me explain what they did. There were only 5 characters who were black in Birth of a Nation. One was called the mammy. The mammy was always taking care of somebody. Usually, you've seen them in Gone with the Wind. Or there was the Tom character. The Tom character was always supporting any type of thing that the KKK was doing. Then there was the coon. The coon was just there to make you laugh. You know, just comic relief. That's all they were there to do. Now, you could also call the Tom the magical Negro, but that's a whole other story if you want to go deep in terms of film. But then there was the Buck. The Buck was anytime a black man was present on film, it was assumed that that person was a criminal, a gangster, or some way trying to harm the innocence of some woman. And then there was what was called the tragic mulatto. The tragic mulatto was an individual who was highly sexualized that people wanted, but was always problematic. You've seen Imitation of Life. The tragic mulatto. And so these 5 images became the standard images in Hollywood. So anytime you went to a film, you saw Amos and Andy. You saw Step and Fetch It. Or if there was a problem, you always saw a dangerous black person. It made its way all the way to the 70s, better known as black exploitation films. You had the pimp and the hustler and the drug dealer, because those images came from the mythos of what we know as Birth of a Nation. All of those things. Then you have 1919, the Red Summer. All across the North and the South, there were what were called race riots. One of the worst was in Chicago. Now imagine, you all know Chicago is right on the water, Lake Michigan. And they had segregated water. I don't know how you have a segregated lake. It didn't make any sense. They had a segregated lake. They said, black people can swim here and white people can swim here, as if it ain't the same water. So one young man was just swimming, floating in the water. And someone said he's floating on the white side. And they began to throw rocks at him. And this young man drowned and died. And as a result, there was this riot that happened all throughout Chicago, 1,000 families displaced. It was horrific. But that set off what was called the Red Summer. From June until January, there were riots all across the United States with, again, because they had in their minds the mythos that flowed from the birth of a nation, that anything that black people are doing, that they're going to be doing something nefarious. In 1921, something happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where an entire town literally was bombed, not with someone throwing bombs, planes flying over to drop bombs on a town. And that was the beginning and impetus when you talk about the artists of the Harlem Renaissance. But the ones who were the great influences for the Harlem Renaissance, there are 4 individuals that I would say that need to be studied and looked at. One being W.E.B. Du Bois was a high influence. He had been the editor for The Crisis. He was one of the founders of what we would call the NAACP. It was called the Niagara Movement, a group of men and women, black and white, who came together to say that we are going to solve the quote-unquote race problem in America. But it is Du Bois who writes, as you know, The Souls of Black Folk. But he has another book called The Souls of White Folk that he wrote about. He said, "High in the tower where I sit, above the loud complaining of the human sea, I know many souls that toss and whirl and pass, but none but there are that intrigue me more than the souls of white folk. I see in them, through them, I view from usual points of advantage, not as a foreigner do I, for I am a native, not foreign, born of their thought and flesh and their language. Mine is not the knowledge of the traveler or the colonial composite of dear memories, words, or wonder. They deny my right to live and be called me misbirth. My word to them, me bitterness and my soul pessimism. And yet as they preach and strut and shout and threaten, crouching as the clutch of rags of facts and fancies to hide their nakedness they go. Twisting, flying by my tired eyes, I see them ever stripped at this moment." Du Bois was trying to say that for a person of African descent, we have the vantage point of living in 2 worlds, that we can see one community and another community. As a matter of fact, we have the ability to code switch. We can be in one space and speak one way. One way you talk with your mama. There's another way you talk with your friends. There's another way you talk when you go to work. There's another way you talk when you're at school answering a question for Professor Jones over here. Whatever it may be, you begin to shift because we live in multiple worlds. But not only was it Du Bois who was an influence of his writing and work, there was another person by the name of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey created the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was the largest African-American organization in history, that they had actual branches from Australia to Europe to South America. And by its end, it was black and it was white. And it's Du Bois, who comes from Jamaica, who was inspired by Booker T. Washington. He simply says this: "I read of the conditions in America. I read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and then my doom, if I may so call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London as I traveled through almost half of Europe. I asked, where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, and his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of big affairs? I could not find them. Then I declared, I will help to make them." So Garvey begins what some call the Back to Africa movement, but he does something so very powerful. The mythos was to communicate that there was something wrong with people of African descent. Marcus Garvey, along with Du Bois, said there's nothing wrong with you. As a matter of fact, you need to look at yourself as being God's creation. And Du Bois was very much a Christian who who flows out of this Caribbean colonial experience and makes his way to America. This movement is growing during the 20s and finds its home in Harlem. Along with Harlem, during the Harlem Renaissance, there is a wonderful and powerful church called the Abyssinia Baptist Church. And during this time period, there is this amazing pastor by the name of Adam Clayton Powell Sr. So powerful that there was a professor at Union Theological Seminary, a professor working there by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made his way over to Abyssinia Baptist Church, and he had never heard what was called the Black social gospel, talking about connecting your faith to what happens in the world. Bonhoeffer goes back to Germany and opposes Nazi Germany because he had heard the words and the witness of not only Powell, but also he was a part of the Harlem Renaissance. A professor by the name of Dr. Reginald Williams has done incredible work around this piece. The other person is Ida B. Wells, and the echo of being able to record what was happening throughout the South, known as lynching, was also a major influence for these artists. And then there is a person that many people do not know by the name of Anna Juliet Cooper. She was a writer, an activist, and an educator. And she said something, I want to quote what she says. It's so powerful because it could have been written today. She said, "The colored woman of today occupies one of many, say, unique positions in this country. She is confronted both by a woman question and a race problem, and yet an unknown or an unacknowledged factor in both. While the woman of the white race can, with calm assurance, enter upon the work they feel by nature of point to do, while their men give loyal support and appreciative contentment to their effort, the colored woman is often finds self-hampered and shamed by less liberal sentiment and a more conservative attitude on the part of those whose opinion she cares most. That is not universally true, I'm glad to admit. There are to be found both intently conservative white men and exceedingly liberal colored men. But as far as my experience goes, the average man of our race is less frequently ready to admit the actual need among the sturdier forces of the world for women's help or influence. But to be a woman of the Negro race in America and to be able to grasp the deep significance of the possibilities of the crisis is to have a heritage, it seems to me, unique in the ages. In the first place, the race is young and full of elasticity and hopefulness of youth. It does not look of the masterly triumph of the 19th century civilizations that with blasé, world-weary look which characterizes seen and unseen. For our voices echo in history. These four voices echo in history. They ignite what we call the Harlem Renaissance. So we have all of these challenges that happen. And we have these voices that are echoing in the minds of the artists. And then you have something that is happening. We know that the work of what is called the Great Migration is happening. People are moving from the South to the North. They're moving all over the country. And as a result of this migration, they are bringing information from where they have come. They are sharing stories, and they are now the artists are being inspired by their grandparents and from their religious traditions and spirituality. And there begins artists making the decision in a space in Harlem of resilience and resistance as revolutionaries. A writer by the name of Sterling Brown writes a poem that could have been written yesterday. The title of the poem is Southern Cop by Sterling Brown. Let me read it for you because the first time I read it, I was shook when I read it. It goes this way, Southern Cop by Sterling Brown. Let us forgive Ty Kendricks. The place was Darktown. He was young, his nerves were jittery, the day was hot, the Negro ran out of the alley, and he was shot. Let us understand Ty Hendricks. The Negro must have been dangerous because he ran. And here was a rookie with a chance to prove himself a man. Let us condone Ty Hendricks if we cannot decorate. When he found what the Negro is running for, it was too late. And we shall say, for the Negro it was unfortunate. Let us have pity upon Ty Hendricks. He's been through enough, standing there, his big gun smoking, rabbit scared alone, having to hear the winches wail and the dying Negro moan. Now imagine, you read this poem in The Crisis or The Defender, and I might add that many people were able to read these poems because of the bravery of men known as Pullman porters. Because the Pullman porters, who were the ones that were on the train, the Pullman car company, which was in Chicago, but the Pullman porters, they had a double entendre. They had a subversive nature. They would pack Chicago Defender newspapers and hide them on the train. And when they showed up in Jackson, Mississippi, they'd pass them over to a paper boy. And then you could find out what was happening around the globe. They would also bring church bulletins from up north, because in those church bulletins, you also had advertisement for jobs. So we had a social network before Mark Zuckerberg knew about social networking. They were passing out the information. And as a result of passing out that information, someone was able to read Southern Cop in the Delta of Mississippi. Someone was able to read Sterling Brown in Jacksonville, Florida. They were disseminating the information to the community. And so Sterling Brown was simply making a statement. Think about what he was doing. He was giving almost satire. Let us forgive Ty Hendricks. Let us understand Ty Hendricks. Let us condone Ty Hendricks. Let us have pity on Ty Hendricks. But here is the powerful thing that he does. He intentionally never gives the young man who was killed a name. Just the way that newspapers would write and elevate the officer, but make the assumption about the victim and not give that person agency or humanity. Sterling Brown, writing specifically because he's saying Black Lives Matter. But not only Sterling Brown, it doesn't end there, not just with the confrontation in reference to these ideas of supremacy. Because here, the ideas of supremacy do not just affect this idea that of a hierarchy that one is above and another is below. It also strips you of your humanity. So normal, everyday activity, somehow you are seeing that you are not a part of. And that is why that May Cowardy, she writes a wonderful poem called Having Had You. It's not a poem about race, but it subversively talks about race because she is willing to actually talk about a sister saying, I don't want to be with you no more. That's a powerful thing. Listen to this. Listen to again, Sister Cowdery. She says, were you anything but what you are, a dream come true, and now a dream again, I might have you back. But having you once and lost you, it's too much to want you back again. So here you have a black woman saying to a brother, I'm sorry, we can't do this. Now remember now, we've already had images of either, the only two images in terms of Hollywood that black women function under is mammy or tragic mulatto. But Cowardy is reclaiming and saying that I'm more than what you think I am. I am fullness of what God has created me to be. And now you open up the Defender, sitting on the kitchen table at Etheridge, Mississippi, and you are reading a poem by a black woman in Harlem who is saying some of the same things you've been thinking, but you can't say out loud. And then you can then go over to the juke joint and hear some songs by Bessie Smith that really lay out some stuff. I'm sorry. I mean, I just have to tell you what some of the folks saying now, Bessie was saying back in the day. And so you have, again, Harlem Renaissance is attacking the ideas of supremacy, but also giving agency and humanity, just as it is also connecting us to our culture. Counting Cullen, considered to be one of the great writers of that era, writes this wonderful poem. I will not read the entire one. I would encourage you to read Counting Cullen's work entitled Heritage. He says, "What is Africa to me? Copper sun or scarlet sea, jungle star or jungle track, strong bronzed men or regal black, women whose loins I sprang when the birds of Eden sang, one 3 centuries removed from the scenes his fathers loved, spicy grove, cinnamon tree, what is Africa to me?" Imagine reading this in the 1930s. You've been told over and over again that you are a problem. There's something wrong with your color, that you are not connected to a culture, and then you are able to read County Cullen, who's raising a question to you. What is Africa to you? That you are a person of African descent. Because remember now, everywhere else in America, institutions have been set up around ethnicity. You could go to the Irish Catholic Church or to the Greek Orthodox Church. You could go to your Scottish meeting of Scottish rites, whatever it may be, ethnicity that would locate people geographically. And then someone's last name, your last name. I would always fascinate when somebody say, "Oh yeah, my last name is Scottish." They're like, "Where's your last name?" I said, "You really want to get into that right now?" But here you have County Cullen sharing that we have a connection, And then there is the poem by Waring Cunny, No Images, where it speaks in a powerful way, where Waring talks simply about the fact of self-hate. It's a simple poem, but speaks on so many levels. It is called No Images, and it goes this way. She does not know her beauty. She thinks her brown body has no glory. If she could dance naked under palm trees and see her image in the river, she would know. But there are no palm trees on the street, and dishwater gives back no images. So here is the poet saying that she doesn't know who she is because she has been relegated to just washing the dishes. And the dishwater does not give a reflection. She doesn't know her worth, her glory, her power, and who she has been created to be. And then I leave for the last poem to read, the one that everybody is familiar with, the person by the name of Langston Hughes. But people need to know how revolutionary Langston was. He was a bad brother. He writes a poem, Let America Be America Again. I will not read all of it, but I think it would be appropriate in this moment. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plains, seeking a home where he himself is free. America was never America to me. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me. Who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain must bring back our mighty dream again. Oh yes, I see plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be. Langston Hughes critiquing America during a time period the height of lynching, still saying, in the midst of the horror and the tragedy, we can be better. An America, and he writes about the fact that not just for black people, not just for brown people, not just for white people, not just for poor people, not just for indigenous, an America for everybody. Can you imagine hearing those words, and you are a veteran, and you had gone to fight for this country, and you came back, and you were forced to sit in the back of the train? Can you imagine reading those words? And here you were trying to educate yourself. You attend a university, and there are people standing in front of you saying you cannot attend. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But hearing the words of Langston Hughes of what America can be. I like the way that W.E.B. Du Bois says it. We are not the United States of America. We are the yet-to-be United States of America. We are a project that we are working toward, not a project that has been finished, but democracy is an unfinished cathedral. And you got to be careful about people who want to sell you that the past is better than your future. You must be careful. And I give these final pieces, and I think my time is about up, that the movement to reframe black life in the midst of the horror of black life, a government clearly not interested in black flourishing. You also have, during this time period, we lift up the artists, we lift up the writers, but I've got to lift up also the filmmakers. Brother by the name of Oscar Micheaux, who had his own studio. And he said, I'm going to produce something people have never seen. Black folk doing ordinary stuff, getting the paper, sitting at the table, eating. Amazing, ordinary things. We didn't have the right to do the ordinary. We either had to do something that was so far outside of what people would do, or we had to be the super Negro. But here's Oscar Micheaux. I just want to show you some ordinary stuff. Two people falling in love. Some folks just cooking some food, eating some good pound cake. Just normal thing. And what that did to see normal images on screen, that black people would just gather to just be able to see an Oscar Micheaux film. And I have to say that I've seen some of Oscar Micheaux films. Some are good and some are just okay. He knew, he said, I'm not the best writer, but my job is, I want you to see yourself in everyday normal life, the simplicity. Then you have the visual artists like Henry Aswana Tanner, painting pictures of a banjo player teaching a child how to play the banjo. Or Aaron Douglas, who is giving these incredible biblical scenes, but yet they are populated by black people. See, here is our problem in America. It is not political will. It is not economic. It is the colonization of our imagination. That we can't see ourselves beyond a current moment, and we allow an algorithm to hack our imagination and tell us what is possible in this nation. But when you free your imagination, that's what the Harlem Renaissance was about. Free your imagination and watch what God can do. So you have the rise of jazz, a freed imagination. You have the expansion of the church. The AME Zion, the AME Church, the CME Church, the Baptist, the Church of God in Christ. We've already had the Azusa Street Revival. All of a sudden, churches are expanding. Guess what? Churches are about either the development of the community, the development of the individual and the community, and also the shifting and changing of democracy, all because of the Harlem Renaissance. And I end with this. As I mentioned Du Bois at the beginning. Du Bois's credo, and I read a portion of it. He said, "This is what I live by. This is what I believe." Du Bois says, "I believe in God, who made of one blood all nations that on earth do well. I believe that all men in black, brown, white are brothers, varying through time and opportunity in form and gift and feature, but different in no essential particular, and alike in soul and the possibility of infinite development. Especially do I believe in the Negro race, in the beauty of genius, the sweetness of its soul, and its strength in that weakness which shall yet inherit this turbulent earth. I believe in service, humble, reverent service, from the blackening of boots to the whitening of souls. For work is heaven, idleness hell, and wage is the well done of the master who summoned all of them that labor and are heavy laden, making no distinction between the black sweating cotton hands of Georgia and the first families of Virginia, since all distinction not based on deed is devilish and not divine. I believe in the training of children, black even as white, the leading out of little souls into the green pastures and beside the still waters, not for health and peace, but for life, lit by some large vision of beauty and goodness and truth. Finally, I believe in patience, patience with the weakness of the weak and the strength of the strong, the prejudice of the ignorant and the ignorance of the blind, patience with the tardy triumph of joy and chastening of sorrow. I believe in patience, patience with God. May God bless you and may God keep you. Thank you. Professor, do we a few questions? We do that? What's next?
Let's give another hand for Dr. Moss. A fantastic, wonderful lecture. So we have a few minutes here, so Dr. Moss, if you would like to take a question or two. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge a couple of people. The founder of the conference, Dr. Lola Richardson, is here. Dr. Richardson, would you stand and please be recognized? And it's so funny, President McCorn. I was a freshman at Paine College when the first conference on the Harlem Renaissance started. So it seems to be full circle that we're still doing it. And it's all because of people like Dr. Richardson that we're able to do that. I want to acknowledge, as you saw on your program, we've had some sponsors that sponsored this year's conference. The Black College Fund of the United Methodist Church, the Morris Museum of Art, that's where we had our lecture in October. And then one of our sponsors is here, Attorney Laverne Lewis Gaskins. Attorney Gaskins, would you please stand and be? She surprised me one day with a call. I said, "Oh, we'll take it." And I want to thank you for coming and supporting our conference and what we do. So I want to open up the floor. We can't have Dr. Moss come all the way from Chicago, although he has to hurry up and get back there, and not engage him because we haven't seen him in so long. But so I want to open the floor if anyone had any questions. And of course, I want to again, okay, good, stand up. And please pick up this book, Dancing in the Darkness. I think it's very good. I think it's probably one. I have all your other books. I came across your first book, Dr. Moss, when I was a student here. Redemption in a Red Light District, Dr. McCorn. I said, "Oh, there go. I said, I should have brought it today, have you sign it again. But so it seems to be a full circle. So the floor is open. You had a question, ma'am? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I already have your book, so I hope you will sign it for me today. But I want to ask you some questions about your book. Two questions. First, how in God's name did you get Simon & Schuster to to publish you? Because I've been trying to get them to publish me forever. And you can answer that later. But the other question is, the characters in your book, I mean, we know about characters like Emmett Till and, all the horrors that his mother faced. But you mentioned a character called Peg. Do you remember Peg in your book? Peg?
That's actually my cousin.
So I was wondering whether that was, because Peg, I thought was a woman in the book, but it's a man who was actually arrested because they thought he had something to do with Davidson. I'm wondering, are the characters in your book real? You said that's your cousin, but did his wife actually, when she kissed him in the casket, was his face really the way you described it? So
Absolutely. So the story she's sharing is about Henry Peg Gilbert, who is my cousin. From my family's from my dad corrects me, not LaGrange. We're from Troup County. LaGrange is a city. But so Henry Peg Gilbert was lynched because there was an encounter between a black man and a white landowner, and when this encounter happened, someone got shot. And this black man, ran north to freedom. They assumed, because my cousin Henry Peg Gilbert was a landowner in Troup County, that he had to have something to do with it. So they arrested him, took his land, and they said he hung himself in prison in Troup County. Well, when they took him to the casket was open, so many bones had been broken in his body. That the undertaker said it was even difficult to prepare the body because it felt like when she kissed him, it was like a bag of bones that were broken. And that story, there was a research group out of Boston that was doing research in reference to trauma throughout the United States, specifically in and around lynching. And they were able to pull together the story of the fullness. But here's the thing, my father, when he was a child at 12, he remembers going to the courthouse when they had brought charges, and he was in the balcony praying that his cousin, quote unquote, they would be dismissed. So it was just, it's part of family lore. Henry Peg Gilbert is a cousin of our family. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have this is not in reference to your book, but it's in reference to you. I know you and your father, are great civil rights activists. So with what's going on, we've come full circle with Make America Great Again. I just want to know your feelings about what's going on today, especially with the president and all of the new rules and regulations that he's making now, and how it's affecting the brown and black people. Just want to know your thoughts on that.
We can have a whole conference on that. But for a short, more historical answer, we are re-entering the post-Reconstruction moment again. The post-Reconstruction moment was this amazing movement where America was moving forward. We had all of these representatives and businesses are being built and all this coalition that's happening. We're like, oh my gosh, America is moving in a different direction. But there was a group, as I mentioned in the lecture, a small group of ex-Confederates, really plantation owners, that said, we want our land back. And once they got in power, they began to dismantle everything that had been put together. And what we are witnessing now is the dismantling of democratic institutions, but it is the strategy being used is, I like to say it this way, naturally, black people and brown people and white people and indigenous people should have natural coalitions together. We should be working together, period. That's what should happen. But what's happening, people in power, what they do is say, you know what? those people over there are taking your jobs. And by doing that, what they do is they end up taking your stuff and other people's stuff in the process. So DEI has become the new N-word today. To say that somehow I lower my standards for a black person to be in a position. Now, one of the biggest or proponents of DEI is a coach by the name of Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant realized he started losing games. And he said, why am I losing games? He says, because you only recruit from Alabama and other places. And he saw that there were some black people on some other teams. He said, we got to expand our recruiting. I want me some of them black folk from California and from Texas. And it changed everything because he believed in diversity, equity, and inclusion because he wanted to win. You expand the table. It's not about lowering standards. But if to continue on, I mean, I can go on for days on this thing, but continue on. If you look at those who were accepted to Harvard, 43% of those who are accepted to Harvard are either legacy or connected to a donor. To me, that's lowering standards. Opening a door specifically because your parents gave money, and now you have a space or a slot. Let me put it this way. Derek Bell, one of my favorite legal scholars, no longer living, he taught a class on the law and affirmative action. And he did this to his students to really help them understand what this idea is about. He said, how many people here disagree with affirmative action? He's primarily a larger white audience. He taught at NYU and Harvard. And a lot of the students said, no, I disagree. People shouldn't just have a spot. He said, okay, that's fine. All right. So then he does this with all the students. He says, I have 2 resumes here. I have a resume from Harvard, A+. I have a resume from, he just made up a school, I guess, let's say New Jersey State or Rutgers or something of that nature. And it said, same resume, A+. Who are you going to hire? Every single one of his students said, I hire from Harvard. And Derek Bell then said this. He said, so you believe in affirmative action based on class, but not race. You give someone a leg up solely based upon socioeconomic reasons, but not the other way. And so he was helping people to understand the thinking that we have and assumptions that we have. And this administration is playing on propaganda assumptions and mythos in order to divide, in order to destroy, in order to dismantle, and to create an oligarchy and not a democracy. So that's my point. So that's it.
Dr. Mouse, Bear Bryant wanted Bob Hayes real bad, but Bob Hayes refused to go to that.
That's right. That's right.
Such an enlightening and a re-enlightening for myself and all that you said today. And the president alluded to the fact that we are in some somewhat like terrible times now. But for us, and I kind of have a question centered around those folk in the Renaissance and their behavior, their way they participated in the things that they did to help, our people. What are some key points of practice as a race of people, for one, then one as a community of people, meaning our community, okay, that we can put into practice that can be taken from that period. And looking at that, we know our community, and there's been a diaspora amongst us from our community on outward. What can you tell us and give us, some advice on where we should be?
Certainly. Well, one of the first things, what we can learn from that period is the idea of being deliberate with your dollars, not supporting organizations that don't support you. So the Harlem Renaissance was real clear about that. Oscar Micheaux, he's got a studio. He's putting forth these films, and saying, hey, I want to show you ordinary black life. And people were supporting that, supporting the establishments that highlight black artistry, whether it's music, the visual arts, things like that. So being deliberate with your dollars. The second is that everyone should be a part of an organization that seeks human flourishing. Not just seeks human flourishing. Is the organization that you're a part of wants to see human beings flourish? Whatever that organization is, whether that is an NAACP, whether that is your church, whatever it is, are you part of an organization that's doing that work? The third is supporting organizations that are doing the fight. Not everybody's going to be on the front line, but everybody can pitch in some way, shape, or form. Whether it is your pennies or your volunteering, we can all pitch in to ensure that there's going to be human flourishing. I use the example of in Atlanta, John Wesley Dobbs and others. And Dobbs, who was at first, I want to get it right, he was first a barber and then later a business owner. And one of the things that he did was, he said, I'm never going to be on the front line. He said, I don't want to mess up my business, He said, but the money of those who got arrested and needed a lawyer, Dobbs was the person who was supporting to provide the financial wherewithal to ensure that they always had representation. He said, you're never going to see me on the front line, but I'm deliberate with my dollars. And that becomes one of the most important things that we must begin to be deliberate with our dollars. Do not support any organization that does not support you.
Okay, and this will be the last question right here. Okay?
Local artist.
My first question is, how do you explain particularly white evangelicals who support Donald Trump? Second question, how do you explain the growing number of black men who support Donald Trump? And how should we deal with those two constituencies?
Oh, great question. The first thing, white evangelicalism that supports Trump, and this has been a long movement. So I'm going to try and give a more succinct answer in terms of the research in and around white evangelicalism. The civil rights movement had at its heart the work of the black church, doing incredible work, especially for people in the South. When evangelical leaders at the time, because the evangelical church didn't involve themselves in the civil rights movement, what they said is, we just going to be quiet, or we're going to set up our own separate schools. That's how we ended up with what we call private Christian schools, and homeschooling comes out of the segregation movement. That's just the history. But a name you will know, Jerry Falwell, along with, I'm trying to remember, Kurt, I can't think of his last name, it starts with a V. He's one of the major movements. His name's escaping me right now. They wanted the power that the church demonstrated in the movement, but they did not want the moral rooting. They wanted the power. So they used the black civil rights movement and how churches organized to be the basis for how they would organize, and began the conservative takeover of places like the Southern Baptist Church in 1978. The second portion of that was the creation of what we call Bible colleges. So they would find somebody and say, you know what, most preachers, they're bivocational. And say, you know what, you can come to my Bible college with no debt, and you can get your degree or certificate. So now during the 80s and the 90s, you had this movement of these, quote, schools that were recruiting, not women, men. And the cost of tuition was that you have to promote a Falwellian theology. So we now have this movement that has moved away from the Livingstones and moved away from the Morehouses and moved away, but now you have communities that are saying, hey, you can be debt-free, come study with us. And therefore you ended up creating an entire group of people that had a particular theology. Now we take a step further. Mark, you said about black men, that's part of it. The second piece is that the algorithm, the movement of digital companies, and one of the things that conservatives have done incredibly well, they have been working since 1973 to create an ecosystem or ecosystem, really ecosystem and an ecosystem, but an ecosystem that will allow people to hear their perspective and their perspective only. Bob Jones University and other places, but not just Bob Jones. I'm now got Bob Jones University on YouTube. And then I want to get you, once you get in the algorithm, you then get Bob Jones and then a school that's just like Bob Jones. And after I hear 5 other podcasters who are also sponsored by Turning Point USA and given money to promote a particular perspective, I then am caught into the rabbit hole that said, you know what? I shouldn't listen and read the news because they're false. There's something wrong with what they give because I know that that's a problem. So now I'm reading this. Then on top of that, I already feel disenfranchised. One of the biggest issues was in the Atlantic magazine for men, not just black men, for men. They talk about men and loneliness. That so many men of between ages of 18 and 40 don't have strong relationships with anybody. And the internet then becomes the way in which they end up building false relationships through social media. They think they have relationships with people. And when you have that kind of recipe, you can then make Proud Boys. When you have that kind of recipe, you can then create these other organizations. And we're back to what? Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction again. That's how the KKK was developed. You know, them people, they taking stuff from you. We'll be your community. And we will have rituals to be a part of this community. You know, and then once you become a part of this community, it's going to be like a fraternity. That's what they called these organizations, fraternal organizations to make sure that America is taken back. That's how we got here. So what do we need? We need to have the rites of passage rituals for young men so that they can build relationships once again. But historically, in our country, I mean, it doesn't make a difference if you're black, white, whatever, we don't do well with teaching men how to build relationships. Just be strong, don't cry, sit up there and all that other mess. And meanwhile, you get a heart attack, stroke, and everything else and die before everybody else. Because we haven't taught men to be the fullness of who they are. Because we got a John Wayne syndrome instead of having a Jesus model. And John Wayne will kill you early. Jesus, if you go down, you will get resurrected. Yes, ma'am. It's great to see you.
Hi, I am a retired 35-year teacher, and Reverend Moss knows my compassion for children, and even though I'm retired, I'm still dealing with kids. My question for you is, dealing with children. Children will be children. You know, people may debate that, but I don't care, children will be children. Our children are hurting even more now than they were years ago. Our children have needs. But what are they to do when we as adults, we are failing them? And we continue to fail them. And I look at what the administration is doing now, and I'm going to be totally honest with you. It doesn't bother me at all. And the reason it doesn't bother me as a Black person, because we've always struggled, and we know what to do. We know how to make soup. That's how my mom and grandmother always put it. You know, we worked the kitchen. We took the scraps, so we know how to survive. And I wish that we would just get back to that mentality and realize that we have children to raise. We are so worried about the wrong thing. So my question to you is, what are we as failing adults? What do we need to do to get back to taking care of our children? Because that's what we really need to be focused on instead of worrying about what he's doing.
Great question, Nicola. I think that you measure a nation, you measure a community, you measure a state, you measure a city of how they care for their children. And children are not a priority in our society, just as elders are not a priority. So from elders to children, I believe we have to be part of a movement to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves. One of my favorite organizations is an organization called Children's Defense Fund. It's now headed up by a good friend of mine, Starsky Wilson. And Starsky is working on that problem in itself. How do we train people to be good advocates for children? How do you fight for children locally and then also statewide and also nationally? We have to learn the tools of how we become appropriate advocates. And one of the things that the Children's Defense Fund does is something called, Freedom School, which is simply focus on literacy and history during the summertime. And every child who goes through it, they do exceptionally well through these programs. We have to make the priority. And we have to use our voices not to allow people who think they're leaders to believe that they're leaders. They should be managing our agenda. That's what elected officials are supposed to do, managing our agenda. And truth be told, this current administration has a small group of people who are managing the so-called president is not just doing this willy-nilly. He has people that are just saying, sign this, do this, go forward with this. That's it. And we have to recognize that if we're going to make children a priority, we have to do the same thing, locally, statewide, and nationally. Otherwise, we are going to be in major trouble, and we already are going down that road of being in major trouble as a nation. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Okay. So I want to. Okay, Dr. Yes.
I just want to. I just want to tell you, Mr. Jones, how proud I am of you and how pleased I am with the session and the others that you've done. Believe it or not, when I read about the Harlem Renaissance, I was in a graduate class at Augusta State University, and I made the decision that because I did not know about, I'd heard of Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes and all of those, but I did not know the terminology, the Harlem Renaissance. And I said, you know what? All children, and not just Black children, but all of them need to know about the Harlem Renaissance. And I'm so thankful that I was at Paine College at the time, my alma mater, and I know that I see Dr. Millender and several others were here when we did the Harlem Renaissance. Oh, hey, I didn't see you. But I'm so glad. I'm so thankful that you invited me, and I'm so thankful that you all are keeping it going, and I appreciate it, Dr. McCorn, and my gosh, what a speech. Yes. And thank you all so much, and thank you for coming. And please keep in mind that this is something we need to keep going. Believe it or not, about a month ago, I received a call from somebody in Harlem. I have the name in my phone. But he was getting permission to have the Harlem Renaissance. I said, but you're in Harlem. That's where it all started. So we really do. This is our history. We need to keep this going. And thank you so much. And thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.
Let's give it up again for Dr. Richardson. Thank you for your vision. And give it up again for Dr. Otis Moss III. What a powerful presentation. We could be here all day, y'all. This is so rich, and it's a needed discussion, and we'll find ways to follow up on this so that it isn't only a once or twice a year kind of thing. This is a conversation that is so relevant for where we are now, and we need to figure out, as Dr. Moss suggested, that we make the points that he made actionable. How do we act on these for Paine College, for our community? I really do want Paine to be one of the heralds of the new Black social gospel. We ought to be the headlight and not the tail light. So I'm grateful for your vision, Dr. Richardson, and so glad that Dr. Moss was here today. We're going to move quickly. I think he's going to be set up out here to sign books. He's only got about 20 minutes, so y'all better move quickly to get that. And I'm going to ask Professor Jones if you would make sure you get to all of our invited guests to meet us at the Sadie Gray Mays conference room for lunch, and then he's got to catch a flight. So, Dr. Felder, would you come and give us a closing prayer? I see you moving this way.
Join me as we pray together. Stony the road we trod, bitter, so bitter the chastening rod. Dear God, we come to you in this season when it seems that all hope is lost, but we stand on the promises of God, that whatsoever we desire when we pray, if we believe it and get up and go do it, we shall see it come to pass. Help us not to despair in this season in which we live, but to live in a season of hope. Make of this our new Ebenezer, our new season of possibility, our claim to fame and faith. And now as we go down from this place, guide us as we go, we pray in Christ Jesus' name. Amen.